Chan. I am the co-director of the Center for Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy here at the Humphrey School. And I would like to welcome you to the fourth event in our Advancing Climate Solutions Now Swain Climate Policy Lecture Series. This series was made possible by a friend of the Humphrey School and the University of Minnesota, someone who is known throughout our state, Mr. Tom Swain. This year, Tom turned 102 years old, and every year since his 100th birthday, he has continued to challenge us to take on the climate crisis. Instead of looking backwards at his life, Tom has pressed us and his family and everyone that he can catch the ear of to think about climate change, the future of our planet, and our children and grandchildren, and in Tom's case, great-grandchildren. So Tom came to us wanting to think about how the Humphrey School could enlist citizens of the state of Minnesota and the broader community to find real practicable solutions to address the threat of climate change. We at the Humphrey School knew that we could help answer this call and developed the Advancing Climate Solutions Now series, backed by our expertise in public issues at the intersection of science, technology, environment, and society. In addition to our speaker series that you'll be hearing tonight, the Advancing Climate Solutions Now initiative has hosted numerous panel discussions, seminars, workshops, as well as offering more than 20 large grants to student-led climate action initiatives. And that has happened all across the state of Minnesota at each of the University of Minnesota campuses. We are really thrilled to have you all joining us here this evening, and we invite you to stay tuned on our website for more opportunities to engage with the Advancing Climate Solutions efforts coming to you this spring. So with that, it's my pleasure to announce tonight's Swain Climate Policy speaker, Mr. Michael Noble. Michael is the principal of NobleIdeas LLC, a consulting firm serving in climate and energy strategy for industry, philanthropy, and governments. But many of you probably know him better for his former role as the executive director of Fresh Energy, a title which he held from 1995 to 2023. In that role, he grew Fresh Energy's staff of 40 who worked together to build constituencies and public support needed to adopt climate policies and private sector decisions to advance climate solutions at the pace and scale of the climate crisis. For those of you who work in the energy or climate space, Michael's name will be very familiar. He is both feared and admired by folks who work in the industry as someone who is a tireless advocate. I'm also very happy to have known Michael since I moved here in Minnesota in 2015. He has hired many of our former students, which I'm very proud of, and also has become a real thought partner as he's moved into this next phase of his career. I'm confident that Michael's address tonight will both inform and inspire everyone here to continue to work towards climate solutions. And as Tom has said, we need to continue this fight, not just for us, but because of our responsibility to our children. And so without further ado, please welcome me in welcoming Michael Noble.
Well, it is really such a great honor. I'm a big admirer of you, Gabe, and your phenomenal leadership here at the Humphrey School. What an honor it is to be invited to give a talk here tonight, the Swain Climate Policy Lecture Series. You know, Tom Swain was really such a giant in Minnesota civic life, and for purposes of the talk tonight, which is going to become obvious in a minute, as I explore the partisan divide on climate, I think it is important to know that Tom Swain is a lifelong Republican, and he launched this series at the age of 100, driven by his deep passion that we act on climate. So for a third of a century, I've been immersed in climate science, in climate policy, climate action, working as an advocate to decarbonize our economy here in the North. And so I have always worked to get carbon emissions out of our electricity supply, and now more recently worked to run everything we possibly can on clean electricity. So my purpose speaking to you today is that I want to share some of my reflections about my climate life, but more than that, I want to talk a little bit about this current moment in history. I hope to make the case that there'll be more momentum on climate solutions in the next 4 years than there has been in the past 40 years. So I helped to organize Fresh Energy in 1990. One of my co-founders is here, John Dunlop in the room. Helped to organize Fresh Energy in 1990. I came to work there 5 years later. At that time, there were just 2 employees. I think the other one is here tonight, J. Drake Hamilton. We were the 2 employees in 1995. And last time I checked, I think there were 35 or 40 professional staff, and they're all working together to shape public policy that drives the change, that expands the opportunity, that scales up into the solutions, that creates the markets, do it all equitably, fairly, so that everybody benefits. So now I stepped down about a year ago, and it's prospering under the capable leadership of Brenda Cassellius. So the only thing I need to say about that organization is that they're not responsible for anything that I might say this evening. And by the way, neither is my primary consulting contract, who I'm not even going to mention who it is. So an official history, if there's an official history of the climate movement, I think it should start in the same year I started in climate. In 1990, that was when the first of now 6 assessments was published by the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. So that, as you well know, a very literate audience here, is the assembly of all the world's scientists who study the problem, and from time to time they issue their consensus view on what the hell is going on with the climate. So in their very, very first report that they issued in 1990, the plain physics of the matter was in full view for all to see. The tragic truth is that most of what we understand today about the climate was evident then. It's been fully documented that the oil majors, like Exxon, they knew too, because their scientific understanding was every bit as good as anyone else's. 1994 was really the first really big policy year for renewable energy here in Minnesota, and really in any state at all beyond California. But it is a very wrenching and difficult story, a very difficult history of how industrial-scale renewable energy came to Minnesota. It happened as part of a very bitter dispute. Roger Moe once said it, he was majority leader for 22 years. He said it was the most bitter dispute in his 22 years of whether or not the Minnesota legislature should allow the nuclear power plant at Red Wing, Minnesota to store the nuclear waste outside the plants adjacent to the reactor, just 50 miles from here. And now, in retrospect, looking back all these years, it was a necessary decision in order to keep the plants from closing down. But it deepened a pretty grave environmental injustice. Native community, who had for thousands of years lived on the land we call Dakota County, Rice County, Goodhue County, these people had been pushed on a sliver of a reservation adjacent to the Mississippi River right at Red Wing. That community is the Prairie Island Indian community, home of the Midday Wahkiton Sioux. The community's shared experience is that when the Red Wing steam plant was built, originally proposed and built, the community was never informed what the technology was. The tribe did not grant its consent to live next to the reactor. And in 1994, over the very strenuous objection of the tribe, the legislature approved the storage of nuclear waste outside the plant temporarily on the condition that the federal government would move it away within 8 years. Well, now it's 30 years later, this spring, next month is the 30th anniversary of that vote, or 2 months, I guess. And there's no end in sight to the storage of nuclear waste at Prairie Island, and it's immediately adjacent to the community. And as objectionable as the whole history is, the Prairie Island nuclear waste decision in 1994 was really a landmark law because all these issues got pushed together and mashed up in the scrum of the legislative process. The decision to keep the nuclear power plant open also resulted in the very first utility-scale wind farm built anywhere between California and Denmark. The first utility-scale wind farm. So that modern North American wind farm was out on Minnesota's Buffalo Ridge. And now that's a line of high elevation that forms an equilateral triangle with the border of South Dakota and the border of Iowa. Just imagine a triangle. And it's that line that connects South Dakota to Iowa is the Buffalo Ridge. and that's the windiest place in the state. So that ridge now has many hundreds of turbines along that line. And so many things change over time. I think today most advocates for carbon-free power have rethought their opposition to nuclear power. And last year, when the Monticello nuclear power plant up at the Monticello, Minnesota, was granted an extension of its life until 2040, the Public Utilities Commission debated it for 15 minutes. It was not a controversy. So, nuclear power is a firm source of electricity. It's especially valuable at nighttime when the sun is either down or low in the sky or when the winds are calm for a few days. That's a very valuable way to make electricity. And another way that everything has changed. So when Xcel Energy decided it wanted to seek permission to extend the life of the Prairie Island nuclear power plant beyond the end of its operating license, which would end in 2034, the single most important factor was the consent and support of the Prairie Island Indian community. And I'm happy to announce in the 2023 legislature, Xcel Energy and the tribe came forward with an agreement that was widely supported by both political parties and signed into law by the governor. And now Xcel is supported by the Prairie Island Indian community to seek a life extension of that plant for an additional 20 years. So now let's switch over to the federal government. The federal government, in the 90s, was a disappointment on climate. The President of the United States from 1992 to 2000 was Bill Clinton. And I remember he defeated George H.W. Bush in his reelection bid. And Clinton then selected as his vice president the United States Senator from Tennessee. And Al Gore was his name. And climate groupies like me were elated. So already by 1990, Al Gore had established himself as like a diligent student of the climate. He had shown his true expertise on the subject, publishing a book called Earth in the Balance. You can go back and read a chapter on climate. Everything in there, it's all laid out. I think it's 1989. So the plain physics of the scientific reality, I call it the plain physics of the matter, the plain physics of the matter, was just laid out there in calm prose by a guy who's now Vice President of the United States. So you think we're like, okay, we're in the promised land, right? No. No. It was 17 years before he published his movie, An Inconvenient Truth. That was 2006. So it's 17 years earlier he wrote the book. And the movie made his name synonymous with the idea that we have to act on climate, but he was already calling for that in 1989. And I have it seared in my mind all these many years. It's seared in my mind. It's right in the book that solving climate should be, quote, the central organizing principle of human civilization. He wrote that in 1989. Solving for climate should be the central organizing principle of human civilization. And now the guy's the Vice President of the United States. So here's a personal story. A 500-year flood, this is not that personal, a 500-year flood came to the Red River Valley in 1997. Anybody from the Red River Valley? Raise your hand if you're from the Red River Valley. You remember that? 1997? Al Gore came to Grand Forks. He wanted to survey the damage. He never said anything about climate change. Well, should he? Should he not? The snow that year that had fell in the Red River Valley was 10 feet deep. To give the context for you, the average snowfall in the Red River Valley was 3 feet deep. The previous record was 7 feet deep. These are actual exact numbers. I'm not making this up. So that year, they beat the prior record by the average annual snowfall. But he doesn't come and say, well, this seems like an extreme weather event. He doesn't mention it. So the spring came, unseasonably warm like this year, everything melted all at the same time. And the entire Red River Valley was up to its neck in water. But then a nasty Minnesota winter came back, like it does, and the thermometer fell, I checked this out, to the low single digits, 2, 3, 4 degrees, and all that water froze solid. And downtown Grand Forks was 5 feet deep in ice. And then the buildings caught on fire. And then Grand Forks was hollowed out. Must have seemed like the apocalypse. Be 5 feet deep in ice and the fire trucks can't get around. So I'm a college graduate. My alma mater had a professor on staff. His name was Dale Jameson. He's a philosopher, but he was a philosopher who worked at the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So he's kind of a philosopher and a climate guy. He wrote an op-ed in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Lori Striven is here. She remembers this. And there was a photograph of Al Gore standing by the banks of the Red River. And the headline from the op-ed was, "The old Al would have known. Warm globally, flood locally." You don't have to read the damn op-ed. This is the picture, Al Gore standing by the river, the headline. Whoever wrote the headline wrote a good headline. And I do not tell this story to disparage Al Gore. He is the greatest climate advocate of my generation. And now that I'm saying this publicly, someone might do a LexisNexis search and tell me I'm wrong. But Al Gore wrote a very long op-ed, unusually long, 2,000 words, 2,100 words, the following week explaining the relationship between climate science and severe weather events. He laid out the whole science in an op-ed in the Star Tribune the next week, basically responding to the op-ed. Like, you call me out an op-ed, I get an op-ed. So he lays it out. And I'm bug-eyed because as far as I know, neither Al Gore nor Bill Clinton had ever publicly said anything about climate change at all since their election. And now it was 97 and they were in their second term. So imagine how dejected I am watching the news every day. Are our leaders going to lead on climate? When the climate guy, the senator from Tennessee, is the vice president and never talks about it and has to be called out in an op-ed in the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. Imagine how I feel about that. So the reason I tell the story is it's just a symbol of the abject failure of the federal government over 32 years that the climate guy failed at it. So it was because he couldn't get any consensus, meaningful consensus for any action whatsoever. And it wasn't just the 90s. It lasted from 1990 until 2020. So inaction, bipartisan action. There's 16 years of Democratic presidents, 16 years of Republican presidents. And then the issue became partisan. Now, how do you solve an issue when one of the two teams gives it no legitimacy at all and won't even acknowledge that it's real? Well, that's why I called out Mr. Swain's Republican heritage. If one of the two teams won't even acknowledge it's real, how do you make progress? How do you talk about it? So there's a reason it became partisan. It's pretty well documented in a lot of books, but one of my favorite books is Jane Mayer's Dark Money, The Hidden History of Billionaires Behind the Rise of the Radical Right. She has a whole big section of that book on climate and the disinformation led by the oil industry. Special mention, I got to name them out, the American Petroleum Institute, ExxonMobil, Koch Industries. You know, Koch Industries is a privately held company whose revenues in 2021 were $125 billion. And by the way, did you know their largest asset is the refinery in Rosemont, where you buy your gasoline? In the 2008 presidential campaign, there was almost no difference between the two political parties. So it didn't get debated. America's presidential candidate on the Republican side was John McCain. And at the time, Senator McCain was arguably the foremost leader in public office on climate policy. That's hard to believe. The Republican senator from Arizona, Senator McCain, was arguably the foremost leader in public policy in the United States of America that we must act on climate. So he was the chief author of all the major legislation that was proposed from 2000 to 2008, all the bills that never got a vote. He was the chief author. And then there's a skinny kid from the south side of Chicago, Barack Obama, freshman senator. He mostly agreed with all Senator McCain's excellent climate positions, so why would you debate that? You debate other things. You don't debate that. If you both agree that we have a serious climate problem, you don't debate that. But then something happened right then. the issue did not get debated in 2008. So now let's fast forward to 2012. So now most of the candidates running for the Republican side were pretty good on climate. I can name 4 of them: Huntsman, Gingrich, Romney, and Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. They all had thoughtful careers on climate change. All 4 main Republican contenders for the 2012 nomination were pretty good. Maybe one of them was excellent and 3 were pretty good. But they all backpedaled on climate in 2012 because each of them had seen how the oil industry had taken down Republicans who were good on climate. And so they all backpedaled. Now I'm going to bring this home. I'm going to really bring it home right here. Prior to the sweeping clean energy victories in the Minnesota legislature that happened last spring, the very, very best year for the climate and energy movement was the 2007 session when Governor Pawlenty was governor. I call it the year the clean energy ran the table. Every single good bill became law. Well, the legislature set a 25% renewable energy requirement for all the utilities. It ramped up all the utility energy efficiency programs. All new coal plant construction was banned. Minnesota set science-based climate goals in statute. Tip of the hat to J. Drake Hamilton, who helped lead on that. And after that year, Minnesota was once again one of the top 3 or 4 states in the country on climate policy, just as it had been in 1994, that so-called Prairie Island year, 13 years previously. And I remember like the thrill of the negotiations and the endgame political scrum and all the lobbyists. I remember that really well. And we were basically sitting negotiating billions and billions of dollars of capital investment in wind power. And I knew that every 1% was about $200 million worth of wind power. Like every percent counted. like if we can get 16% in 2015, that's better than 14% because every percent counted. And so they were all passed by a strong Democratic majority. But it's way more important than that they were signed into law by Governor Tim Pawlenty. Because my point should be that climate change shouldn't be partisan now because it wasn't partisan then. And 90% of the legislators in both political parties voted for all of those bills, by the way. Can you imagine that 90% of the legislators in both political parties would vote for all those climate bills in 2007? So I tip my hat to Governor Pawlenty, like a drum major in front of the marching band. Even though the momentum was driven by the champion Democrats, the governor deserves to get full credit because he signed all the bills into law. He deserves to get full credit. And I was advising the inner circle of the legislative leaders, but I was regularly talking to the inner circle advising Governor Pawlenty. I was like in constant back and forth, like, can we make a deal on this? Are we going to get to yes? Because the governor obviously has the veto threat. He can always say, I won't sign that bill. But I learned years later from these insider friends of mine that the governor always knew he was out in front. And not just in front in Minnesota, that he was in front nationally as a governor. And I was told that when 6 or 8 of his key people were like in his office together and they were debating, can we do this, can we do that? This is a quote, I'm quoting here. Governor Pawlenty was always the greenest guy in the room. So I got to say that about him. Now I'm going to take this back from him in a minute here. So the following year, again, was 2008. 2007 was when all the bills passed. The following year was 2008. And Senator McCain was going to be the nominee. He was the nominee. And he was, again, I tell you, a legitimate hero on the climate. But then his job is now, what's his most important job now? Selecting a running mate, right? And I remember watching TV, and one of the anchors said, all eyes are on the state of Minnesota. Governor Pawlenty would be an obvious choice. 2-term Republican governor, Midwestern state, blue state. The guy's young. Get him on there with Senator McCain. But it wasn't meant to be, was it? It was the very next day. I looked this up last night. It was Friday, August 29th. And Tim Pawlenty went to the state fair that day. And all he did all day long was say nice things about Sarah Palin of Alaska. because she was the vice presidential choice, not him. Can you imagine? Then that was Friday. On Monday, the Republican National Convention started in St. Paul, Minnesota at the Xcel Energy Center on Monday. So on Thursday, he thinks he's going to be the vice president. On Friday, he's telling all the fairgoers what a great American Sarah Palin is. And on Monday, he meets Sarah Palin in St. Paul, Minnesota when the Republican National Convention starts. Thursday, Friday, Monday. So she's on the podium, and what does she do on the podium? Does she say, hey, what a great climate leader Tim Pawlenty was? No. She led 6,000 delegates chanting. It's still a political chant that we hear today. You know what it is? Louder? Louder, come on, with feeling. So they're shouting, drill, baby, drill, drill, baby, drill. And Governor Pawlenty's standing in the back thinking, it could have been me. Well, here's what I'm going to say about that. On the day that John McCain made that decision, Republican politics took a dark turn on climate issues and on everything else. That's my opinion. So now, Governor Pawlenty decided to run for office himself as President of the United States in 2012, and it was right on stage here at the Hubert Humphrey School of Public Affairs. Governor Pawlenty said, no one really knows what causes climate change. I wasn't here, but I was listening on the radio. There was an audible gasp from the audience. It's like you could hear it right on the radio. The audience gasped. Now, why did they gasp? Did he believe that? Or did he just need to say that in order to be a candidate? My view, he wasn't ever going to let Sarah Palin push him to the margins ever again, as he had been 4 years earlier. He was going to be in the mainstream. So he says on stage at the Humphrey Institute that no one really knows what causes climate change. But I already told you that his insider people told me he was the greenest guy in the room. Well, that's the power of money in politics. You could just be cruel and say it's hypocrisy, but you could also be like, he wanted to be president of the United States. He's trying to get the nomination. So he just says offhandedly, well, no one really knows what causes climate change. That's what the base needed to hear, that Governor Pawlenty thought that. So the spreading of disinformation and denial by the industry had been going on for years and years and years. The oil industry had funded many, many nonprofits, a lot of them bigger than Fresh Energy, I'll tell you that, all they do is spread doubt, obfuscation, confusion, and to reach the elites, they talk at the Wall Street Journal editorial page, and to reach the Main Street, they just talk on Fox News. And it was by 2012, and I'm just going to say it out because it's the truth, the anti-climate takeover of one of the two major political parties was absolutely thorough and complete. By 2012, it was completed. The deal was done. The power of money in politics. Now, historians would point out that partisanship on climate was just one aspect of the rightward push in response to Barack Obama's presidency. So, of course, he was completely unable to advance his climate plan in 2007. And that plan was, people remember what that was called? The cap and trade program. That is a declining cap on carbon pollution and a market for trading the permits. Now, here's my opinion on that. I completely and totally fault the American environmental movement for that catastrophe, more than the president. And that's a completely different lecture that I'm happy to give in a class anytime. Invite me, I'll come do that. So to his credit, Barack Obama showed that there's a better way forward, and it actually a little like a premonition or a presaging, or what's the word, foretelling, foreshadowing of what actually turned out to work. So the economy almost collapsed in 2011. Remember, the economy was circling the drain in 2008. The guy gets elected. The headline in The Onion was, Americans give worst job in the world to black guy. That was The Onion's headline. And so he's got the job of the economy circling the drain. How are you going to bail out the economy? So he had a stimulus plan. And the stimulus plan had an amazing section in it of energy investments. They were shovel-ready energy investments. And there's a great, great book about this topic, literally a book about the stimulus plan's energy investments, like for nerds, like, come on. And the name of the book is The New Deal, The Hidden Story of Change in the Obama Era by Mike Grunwald, a fabulous, fabulous book. And as an example, that stimulus bill was the most important puzzle piece in the birth of the electric car industry. That bill, the Obama bill, birthed the electric car industry. I don't know if Elon Musk will give him credit, but that's the truth. So now I'm going to fast forward from 2012, the election of 2012. I'm going to fast forward all the way to the 2018 midterm elections, and I know I'm skipping over 6 years. And the reason I'm skipping over 6 years is because nothing happened. It was paralysis, year by year by year, paralysis, nothing happened. Climate is bad, it's getting worse, everybody knows it, nothing happened, year by year by year, it's now 2018. So, but every year there was progress in the states. And not just Minnesota. I'm proud, obviously, of the progress in Minnesota, but there's a whole bunch of important advances driven by local and regional and state-based groups. I'm going to shout out California, New York, Colorado, Washington, Oregon, Maryland, Massachusetts, all great climate leadership from the states. That's how democracy works. It comes from the states. And I always thought that Minnesota had a special role in the heartland, and because we're away from the blue states on the East Coast, and away from the blue states on the left coast, but we're in the heartland, the middle of America. It matters when we do it here, it matters more. But now there's fabulous momentum in so many states, and the saddest news I have to report to you is that the deep partisanship is now baked into the system. It's baked into the system now. And although the states continually started to show how we're going to do this, the Congress could never get anything done. And you know, the long, sad story of the federal climate catastrophe, 30 years, like my whole goddamn life, from 1990 to 2018, watching failure after failure after failure. The best news is it's been completely swept aside, and that's all over now. And it started in 2018. The 2018 midterm elections did what most midterms usually do, take politics and they move it away from the guy who's president. That's what mostly happens in a midterm. The guy's president in one party, the other party does really well in the midterm, and that's what happened. And the climate warrior Nancy Pelosi, she won back her House of Representatives with her Democrats, but then she had to struggle inside her own caucus to get elected Speaker again. People might not remember that. You'd think that she had troubles on the conservative side with people saying, do we really need liberal Nancy Pelosi from San Francisco to be our Speaker again? You'd think that's what would be going on. But really she was having trouble on her left flank with the climate advocates who were very upset that she was telling everybody, well, you could see who the guy is president. Of course we're not going to get any climate stuff done in the 2018 cycle. And so she couldn't get the votes of the liberals to be Speaker again. And there were youth climate activists now, this is the hero of the story. Youth climate activists had been organizing in high schools and college, all over America for years, both in America and internationally. I'm sure a lot of you were part of that, and I thank you for that. And by 2018, the impatience of young people had pretty much, I'll call it, boiled over. Let's remember that in August, a 15-year-old girl stopped going to school on Friday. And everybody in the world knew who Greta Thunberg was. She spawned an international protest movement. They branded it Fridays for the Future, with basically the argument is, well, why go to school? The world is wrecked and adults don't care. Why go to school? What's the future? Why should I go to school? And what happened then, I so remember this, is the climate movement, there was a tectonic shift, like the plates shifted, and big, important national environmental groups were irrelevant. And the movement, with its aging white leaders in their 60s, weren't that important because the movement was driven by young people who were pissed off. BIPOC leaders, young leaders, and the first day of Congress, the new Congress started in January 2019, the first day of Congress. There's an upstart climate group, and I'll name them, the Sunrise Movement. I hadn't heard of the Sunrise Movement. The Sunrise Movement did something that was quite shocking to all the mainstream environmental groups and all the Washington insiders, all the lobbyists, the Sunrise Movement decided to hold a protest in Nancy Pelosi's office. And they texted a woman who had just been elected, a freshman who was getting ready for her first day on the job, and they asked her if she would tweet about it, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and she says, "Tweet about it, I'll be there." Well, I'm not sure it's the best career move to demonstrate in the boss's office on the first day in Congress. I wouldn't have done that. There was a young woman who was center stage, literally center stage. I think she was on the desk. Her name was Varshini Prakash with the bullhorn, Sunrise. And Varshini Prakash, okay, her name was across the TV screen. I knew who that was. And the 29-year-old freshman congressman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but she had beaten her establishment Democratic primary opponent. She beat him by 15 points. But you remember why she beat him? Green New Deal. That was her thing. That was her brand, is we're going to have a Green New Deal. She'd run on the idea that we needed a total mobilization of the American industry and American society, just like we had for World War II. A mobilization to completely address the climate crisis. And of course, I was in favor of a mobilization like that, but I was not actually in favor of mobilizing in the Speaker of the House's office. And I admit today that my pragmatic approach probably wasn't the right thing for that moment in history, because the young people remade the climate politics in America by being just ruthlessly aggressive and mad, and putting everybody on notice. This isn't good enough. You are not good enough. But, Nancy Pelosi is kind of a hero of mine. So I'm thinking, well, they're kind of going after their friends. So what happened then is the American politics were completely remade, and that's all played out in the bruising primary of who get to be the Democratic nominee for president in 2020. Remember, there was a lot of folks who want to be president. Remember that? A guy named Jay Inslee put out 200 pages of climate platform he was going to be the nominee. And every single person who wanted to be president of the United States on the Democratic side said they had a Green New Deal. And people don't remember this detail, because how America learned about the Green New Deal is Fox News talked to them about it every day for about 6 months. And then Democrats stopped saying the words Green New Deal because it was now a swear word. But each person who was going to run for the Democratic nomination had to have a Green New Deal. So when Biden emerged as the nominee, by the way, he'd gotten an F by Greenpeace for his climate position. Greenpeace gave Biden an F. So Biden emerged as the nominee, and a lot of people mistakenly thought that he was a cautious centrist. And in my view, is what he's really cautious to be is absolutely at the center of the Democratic political party. And so after he was nominated, he put together a work group and asked him to hammer out his climate and energy policy agenda. And he wasn't going to take any Green New Deal name, but he was going to take all the Green New Deal ideas. And so he put together this work group, and he had John Kerry, a trusted mainstream climate hawk, who I think just last week he stepped down as the international envoy to the United Nations on climate for President Biden. He was a chair, and the co-chair was Bernie Sanders. So Kerry and Sanders is the full spectrum of the Democrats. And what do you know, on that committee is Varshini Prakash, the young 26-year-old with the bullhorn, is on the committee to help nominee Biden put together his platform. I'm like, whoa, how does that happen? Go from bullhorn to, I don't know if you don't follow politics close enough. That struck me as pretty amazing. But the youth movement moved the entire Democratic electorate over to where the youth were on climate. And then the guy running for president of the United States had to have the position that was the center of the party. So that's how Joe Biden became a climate hero, is youth made him. They're like, you have no choice. You want to be the nominee, you have to do this. So now this whole new platform is in front of Joe Biden, and he ran, and he won. I hope everybody's with me on that. He won. On a sweeping platform that was finally completely aligned with the need for speed, scale, massive speed, massive scale, basically consistent with the plain physics of the matter, the physical reality of the situation. Not platform, physical reality, Now they match, and the guy wins. So then you think, oh, well, he can't pass that platform, can he? Well, the platform was investment, standards, justice, a completely brand new climate agenda. None of it existed. Just that little hint of it from Barack Obama in the stimulus bill about investment, just a hint of it. But climate justice, climate investment, and climate standards was the new platform. And the old agenda, my friend's agenda, mostly Fred Krupp's agenda, people know who that is? CEO for 50 years, I think, of the Environmental Defense Fund. The old strategy was limit the carbon, restrict the pollution, restrict people's ability to pollute, reduce people's consumption, price the carbon, tax the carbon, and trade the the pollution permits. All these old strategies were all gone. None of them were in the bill. None of them were in the platform. None of them, Joe Biden didn't run on any of it. They run on the kids' platform. Justice, investment, standards. And so I think on the election day in 2020, I watch this stuff really closely. I believe that climate was the very, very top #1 issue in politics in America on election day. I mean, like if you look, like what are the ads and who said what and what were the last 3 days, and climate was the top issue in American politics on election day. And the new president promptly re-engaged the world, like, hey, we want to be part of the rest of the world. The president promised it right away. And the international process is very flawed, but individual countries each come and make their own promises about what they can each do. And but all 192 nations have now pledged we get to zero. 192 nations. Even the nation that is completely not in their self-interest, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iran, every nation of the world, of the civilized world, has all agreed that we're getting to zero by the middle of the century. And Biden's pledge is we're going to get halfway there this decade. Okay, that would actually be consistent with what the science requires. That would be amazing. We get halfway there this decade. That's just 5 years and 3/4 from now. So, and then he just promised us again in the State of the Union last week, get halfway there this decade. He promised it again. And I just throw out here, I think it's reasonable in an election year for young voters to see the actual plan. What he accomplished this year so far gets us about 2/3 of the way or 3/4 of the way, halfway, but not halfway, not cutting our emissions by half by 2030. So again, now here's mainstream politics in America. Net zero by 2050, okay, we're all agreed on that. All the nations of the world, we all agreed on that. Net zero by 2050. Halfway there this decade. That took up all the space created by the radicals and the Green New Deal and AOC and all that. Well, that's a pretty damn good return on investment to get everybody who's serious to agree we're going to get all the carbon out by 2050. We're going to get halfway there this decade. That's exactly where we are right now. So, shocking to everyone. Well, this part wasn't shocking, but the president's Build Back Better program basically got completely demolished by 2 senators, the Democratic Senator Joe Manchin, the Independent Senator Kristen Sinema. But when they demolished 80% of what he wanted to accomplish, believe it or not, the climate platform pretty much stayed intact. Not exactly intact, but more or less intact to what was hammered out by Bernie Sanders, John Kerry, Varshney Prakash, and Joe Biden. Pretty much Joe Biden got what he wanted on climate out of the Build Back Better. And shocking to everybody, the deal was announced between Senator Schumer and Senator Manchin on the 27th of July 2022, and it just took 2 weeks to get to the president's desk. And I remember when the deal was announced, our own United States Senator Tina Smith, who is one of the most committed and effective and knowledgeable climate senators of all the senators, she happened to be on the presiding on the dais in the United States Senate when Senator Schumer was calling her. You're not supposed to answer your phone when you're on the podium, but Senator Schumer was calling me and calling me. And she asked, what? I'm on the... And then she tweeted right then, holy shit. And I think her comm staff say, Senator, you're not supposed to say shit. But she did, which I was very proud of. And that pretty much reflected how I felt about it and how thrilled I was. And so that bill, the sweeping bill, which for political purposes they named it the Inflation Reduction Act, it is the single most important and significant climate legislation any country has ever passed, ever, including China, including Europe, including anybody ever. It's the most important climate bill ever. And it actually gets us almost to half. Not quite, maybe 3/4 of the way there. It's exactly what the science calls for. If we're going to get to zero by mid-century, we need to get about halfway there this decade. And now the partisan divide could not be any more obvious than on the day of the vote. Every single Democrat voted for the bill. Every single Republican voted no. And Joe Manchin, this is a guy from a state that Joe Biden lost by 40 points. I think 39.5 points. West Virginia went for the other guy. Joe Manchin's got his name on the bill. The biggest climate bill in American history is named Inflation Reduction Act, but it's the Biden-Schumer deal. I mean, it's the Biden-Schumer-Manchin deal. It's Manchin's bill as much as it's Biden's bill. And so he's a coal baron. A coal baron senator, millionaire, multimillionaire coal baron senator from West Virginia is a better climate vote than any moderate Republican in any suburban district outside of Atlanta or outside of New York or outside of Denver or outside of Minneapolis or Pennsylvania or Georgia or Colorado or Arizona. No Republican moderate voted for the climate bill. Not in the House, not in the Senate. So that tells you something profound. When the coal baron senator from West Virginia that the president lost by 40 points voted for the bill, and no moderate Republicans. It's just completely, totally, 100% partisan. And it tells you something profound about the effectiveness of the dark money, about the fossil fuel industry, and the effect that the fossil fuel industry has over the course of my climate life. Now, a sweet, nice little footnote here to the story of deceit by the fossil fuel industry is that our own Attorney General, Keith Ellison, is actually suing Koch and Exxon and the American Petroleum Institute for consumer fraud, deceiving consumers about the nature of their product. And Keith Ellison is seeking disgorgement of all the profits the oil industry made since 2000. That's off to the side. So what every Democrat in the United States Congress delivered to the president is not just a climate policy. It's our energy policy. Oh my God, I waited 50 years. We have an energy policy. We have an energy policy. We have an industrial policy. Industrial policy used to be kind of like a swear word, like economists don't like industrial policy because markets can allocate capital. Now we have an industrial policy. It's the Biden industrial policy. We have a labor policy. Highways, jobs, good jobs, family supporting jobs. The climate bill is a labor policy. It's a manufacturing policy. Why did we give all these industries away to other countries? Why are all the solar panels and all the chips and all the electric vehicle batteries and lithium-ion batteries, why do the Chinese dominate all of those industries? We have an industrial policy to onshore, reshore, bring those jobs back home. And we have a trade policy. You know, it kind of like made the Europeans mad that we're going to massively subsidize all these things, but it's our trade policy. Like, now the Europeans are realizing, well, we have to massively subsidize them too. I sort of strongly believe that it will be so popular that it can't be rolled back, even if our politics turns pretty sharp to the right. To be explicit, in his State of the Union, he claimed that the legislation has fueled, Biden claimed that the legislation has fueled almost $600 billion so far in new investment in manufacturing and in infrastructure, most of it in the clean energy economy. Hat tip to my clean energy economy leaders here. The majority of all those investments in new factories have gone to red states, red districts. Majority, you know. I think the biggest winner is, actually, Georgia is not a red state anymore. It's a purple state now, isn't it? But, you know, Tennessee and North Carolina and South Carolina and Texas and Alabama and, you know, I don't believe the Inflation Reduction Act can be repealed, regardless of the makeup of the executive branch and the legislative branch. So now, closing here up, everything going forward is completely different from my climate life. It's all different. So for the first time in history, the most prosperous nation on the world that has by far dumped the most carbon pollution into the sky has a good shot at cutting emissions in half this decade. We have a good shot. The plan is straightforward. First, we get all the carbon pollution out of the electricity supply. Then, we electrify everything we can. In addition to that, we have 10 years of incentives that's going to drive innovation on all the thorny problems like air travel, shipping overseas, making cement carbon-free, making steel, making fertilizer, manufacturing chemicals. But we have incentives for 10 years in place. So I want to bring this all back to home to Minnesota and bring it back to here to the School of Public Affairs. And the Minnesota legislature that convened January 3, 2023, we got pretty early action on climate by Governor Tim Walz. His signature climate and energy proposal was to get all the carbon out of our energy supply. And now that's the law of the land by 2040. It's just 16 years from now. And the session began. The bill was very well vetted, well understood. Everybody had seen it because it had already passed the House of Representatives in 2020. It had already passed the House of Representatives in Minnesota in 2021. It never got a hearing in the Republican Senate. And the chief author in the House was a progressive urban Democrat. His name is Majority Leader Jamie Long. He's from Minneapolis. The chief author in the Senate was more of a moderate rural guy, a farm guy from North Mankato, Nick Frentz. And immediately they realized they needed each other. Because let's just work out all these amendments together and make strategy decisions together because I'm a moderate, I'm going to help you with all the moderates in your House caucus. And because you're a liberal, a progressive, you're going to help me with all the progressives in the Senate. We actually need each other to get every single Democratic vote because they had no margin. The actual political structure of the legislature last year was that the House of Representatives, they could lose 2 Democrats, could vote no, and in the Senate, 0 Democrats could vote no. That was the political reality. And they did this bill in 3 weeks. From introduce the bill, we're done here. We need every vote. So I would argue, back to the youth and back to the people in the room, that the Democratic majority of 34 to 33 in the Senate was made by young people because college people voted in overwhelmingly high turnout numbers in the last election, especially in college towns like St. Cloud and Mankato and Moorhead, and even in suburban Duluth, where all the closest races were won by the Democrats. And guess what? Politicians in St. Paul all know that young people care about climate change. It's not a big secret. Everybody knows. People may not remember Varshini Prakash and the bullhorn and the Nancy Pelosi story, but they know that young people didn't used to vote very reliably. This time they really voted, and they really care about climate. Message delivered. The message was delivered. So now we have an incredibly strong climate law to get all the carbon pollution out of the electric supply in the 15 years. And just give a shout out to our electric companies. Xcel Energy supported it. 2 utilities who weren't expected to support it did. Minnesota Power and Great River Energy. Minnesota Power serves the Iron Range in Duluth, and 2/3 of its sales goes to 8 large industrial companies in iron mining and pulp and paper. They have committed to be 80% wind and solar and hydro and storage by 2030. And that is a pretty damn dramatic change from just 2005 when Minnesota Power was 95% coal-fired power. Okay? So in 2030, they're going to be 80% wind, solar, hydro, and storage. And in 2005, they were 95% coal. I want to shout out the electric co-op Great River Energy, serving 27 distribution co-ops across the state. Just had its resource plan approved by the Public Utilities Commission last week. Publicly committed 95% carbon-free 10 years. Whoa. Something happening here. That's as ambitious as any utility anywhere. More and more people are now realizing the transition from carbon energy sources isn't just necessary for the climate, it's about geopolitical stability. This war in Ukraine has made everybody realize that the energy transition has to go into overdrive because it is a terrible plan to be dependent on oil and gas from your neighbor who wants to conquer you, an autocratic petrostate who's going to weaponize energy and try to conquer its next door neighbor. So here we are now in a world where all the serious and well-informed people have agreed that we're going to get to zero emissions. We're going to do it by the middle of the century. 192 nations have agreed to it. The richest nation in the world has now got the most responsibility, along with China and the EU, is a global race to the top. And now we have to deploy and deploy and deploy and deploy and deploy the technologies that we know, and we deploy them at the speed and scale of the problem. And we have to develop some new technologies that have to fill the gaps. But 80 to 90% of everything we're doing has to be wind, solar, electric cars, batteries. Putting the massive weight of the federal government behind this is what Biden has done. Nearly everything that we need to solve the problem is on sale 30% off for 10 years. Nearly everything we need to solve this problem is on sale 30% off and more. You get extra credits for extra good behavior. 30%, 40%, 50% off. And even though there's been some upward price pressure in the last 3 years on COVID, supply chain stuff, and inflation and interest rates going up, you can expect the long-term prices to continue to go down, 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 with all the major players going down, maybe with the exception of transmission lines. That's not going to get cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And they all enjoy the economies of mass production, and they're all on a learning curve that reliably drives down the price. So I looked this up. I know the data. The year I started my career in energy was 1979. And after I graduated from college, my wife Patsy and I, we were both energy auditors at the weatherization program in Hennepin County, weren't we? I think you started in 80 and I was 79. And we didn't ever imagine having solar energy on houses, because PV solar cells, photovoltaic solar cells, they cost $75 a watt. And the only customer for solar cells was NASA and satellites, because the practicality of that long extension cord was just not workable for satellites, so they had to put solar cells on satellites. And I just looked it up. The most recent Department of Energy quarterly report came out in January. What do you think solar cells cost today? Remember I told you they were $75 a watt? Today they are 11 cents. So solar cells during my climate life have fallen 99.9% in cost. So why am I optimistic? My incredible enthusiasm and optimism doesn't mean we've solved the climate crisis. There's no solving it. The damage has already begun. It's unavoidable that it's going to get worse. But the positive momentum means that the most dire consequences that we were reading about back in 1990 are actually now completely off the table. The most serious consequences are actually off the table. And a book that just was published day before yesterday is called Climate Capitalism, says why. The author of the book is Ashkat Rathi, and the name of the book again is Climate Capitalism. The very first sentence he says, it summarizes actually widely agreed upon body of academic literature, quote, "It is now cheaper to save the planet than destroy it." It's now cheaper to save the planet than destroy it. So because of the technological momentum and the policy, the world is definitely not going to see a world that warms up by 7 degrees or 8 degrees, as the scientists were fearing back in 1990. And it's not going to warm up by 6 degrees or 5 degrees or 4 degrees. Why? Because the energy transition is now underway and it's unstoppable. Look, we stopped building coal plants. We started closing them. The number of internal combustion engines sold annually has peaked, and now it's just going to keep going down, down, down. In 2023, the U.S. emissions dropped again in a very strong economy, breaking the idea that economic growth and emissions are somehow linked. They're not. Emissions went down, the economy got better. Yes, the world is still warming, but American emissions today are what they were in 1987, when this whole narrative and story began. That's what emissions in America are today, what they were when the story began. Well, that's pretty amazing. So our job now, our collective job, your job, actually your job more than my job this time, is to find the pathway, that narrow pathway that can reach this incredibly ambitious goal of keeping the world from warming no more than 1.5 degrees. And if we're not successful at that, we got to fight and strive for the world warming up maybe 1.6 or 1.7 degrees. And that is so much less suffering than 2 degrees. And God forbid it is much less suffering than 3 degrees. But 4, 5, 6, and 7 are off the table. They're not going to happen. And I just point out how tragically unjust it is that the suffering is mostly borne by people who didn't contribute to this problem. You know, the rich nations and rich people, we can adapt. But when the oceans rise, the people of Holland, they can build some higher dikes. But 15 to 20% of Bangladesh is only 1 meter above sea level. And when the ocean rises 1 meter, freshwater resources will be inundated by saltwater. That's not good. So my generation has pretty much handed off a mess, although most of us who worked on it, we tried to slow it and prevent it. We made some difference, but we set the stage. And so now my most hopeful thing in my life is this next generation is you, stepping into the leadership roles. The most hopeful thing is you and your determination, this story of the young people just getting so pissed off that they changed the politics of the world. I kind of like that story. That wasn't my story. I'm giving credit where it's due. So I'm optimistic about the technology. I'm optimistic about investment, the financial tools, financing, more climate policy. So these are the 3 tools: technology, investment, policy. You can all find a place to work, someplace in technology, investment, policy. With all, when we pair all that with the ingenuity, the innovation of your generation, you're going to take us where we need to go. So speaking for myself, my whole generation, we cannot wait to see what you do with your climate lives. It's my invitation to you to think about this and answer this question for yourself personally. So what is the role for you in this important work? What is the path that you can take to turn fear of the climate crisis into action that is meaningful for you personally in your own life? So with that, I thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. We have here some questions from the audience here. Really, thank you so much for that inspiring talk. And one of the first questions I wanted to pose was thinking about us here at the Humphrey School. Across all the areas of policy that we teach in here, there's been a bit of a reckoning over the last few years as there's been more partisanship, as you highlighted in your talk, and more distrust in institutions. And that's really challenged schools of public affairs to think about how to grapple with this moment. A lot of our, the textbooks that I studied when I was a graduate student in public affairs were basically teaching you how to be a technocrat, how to analyze cap and trade policies. When I took climate policy as a grad student, it was 90% how cap and trade policy can be incrementally better. And so I'm curious now from your perspective, what advice would you give to folks who are teaching or studying at the Humphrey School about what you should learn at a School of Public Affairs to be effective in climate policy?
You know, I don't know the answer. I know, I know that you have to, this is a sad story of how partisan it got because, we never actually worked with a Democratic governor for the first 15 or 20 years. I think Mark Dayton was the first Democrat we ever worked with. And it just wasn't partisan. And the board just kept asking me, well, how did it get so partisan? So part of my speech is answering the question, like, people worked really, really hard to make it partisan. It was not an accident. It was like a full-time job of hundreds of people. Let's make this partisan. So we're sort of stuck with that until the one team decides like that's not working for them. There's nothing that Humphrey School can do to undo it. There's nothing that the Academy can do to undo it. There's nothing I can do to undo it, or civil society. It's going to require the one party that says that climate change is baloney to say, yeah, we had that wrong. And I look forward to the day when that's true, because I think it's probably inevitable. What the Academy can do and what the civil society and the nonprofit movement can do is just be fair and truthful. And I like the word fierce, not fierce as in mean, but fierce as in having a strong heart for the work. But I think that you also have to be incredibly civil. You know, I'm proud to say that I have at least 4 or 5 executives at electric companies that I consider to be quite good friends, because I fought with them like crazy for 25 years, and I never treated them mean. I was always incredibly civil. And so civility, I guess, would be one answer. Is, you know, the role of the Academy is education. The role of the Academy is to tell the truth. The role of the Academy is to not be a partisan place. You know, we want to have, you know, Nancy Pelosi says this all the time, is America needs 2 strong political parties that are competing for the voters' interest, and we just don't have that today. We have 2 parties, but I use the phrase over and over again, serious and well-informed people. They might have, you know, they're missing one of the 2. They're either not serious or they're not well-informed if they think that climate change was made up by the liberals to control the economy or whatever arguments they put out. So I'm sad about it. It's really the sadness in the whole talk is that it's sad, but it's also triumphant that we made all this progress that we did. It's really triumphant.
When you think about policymaking now, in this moment of deployment, when we need speed and scale, as you said, what do you think traditional policymaking, as we have been thinking about it, is missing?
Well, you know, policy by nature is incremental. The politicians always tell you, you know, you might not get half a loaf. Can you live with 1/3 of a loaf? But then, you know, Bill McKibben always says that the physics of the matter really don't want to negotiate. The physics is the physics. Politicians can negotiate, advocates can negotiate, but the reality is the reality. So I think it's very important for everybody who is studying this and has a degree, you know, to look at the curve of what it means when I say emissions will be cut in half by 2030. Like, you might say I'm just shooting my mouth off and that's never going to happen. I mean, I think it's important for us to know what we're talking about, that these are serious changes in society. These, you know, we want to stop selling internal combustion engines as soon as it's practical. We want to start converting all our buildings to heat pumps. We want to start industrial processes for fertilizer and steel and cement that don't use natural gas or coal. You know, I don't have to have it all like today, but we got to be planning for it all. So I think the role of public policy is a little shortcoming but look at how they got it right in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's just incredible that Senator Schumer and President Biden and Senator Manchin and 49 other Democrats got to yes. It's mind-boggling that they did that.
Thanks. So we had a question from an audience member who wanted to make sure everyone here knew that it's not just Tom Swain, that there are other senior citizens who also want to make a difference on climate change. You said the young people are the hero of the story, but what advice would you give to older citizens who want to make a difference on climate?
Well, you know, I asked myself that as an older citizen. You know, the secret is I didn't actually retire. I rewired, so I still am working most days. But if I wasn't working, I might look into this new not-for-profit group that has chapters all over the country called Third Act. I think it's very warm and welcoming and smart, and I admire the organizer behind it. You know, I said all these nice things about Al Gore. I said some mean things about Al Gore, but Bill McKibben has been an American hero since 1990. He wrote the book The End of Nature in 1990. He was originally a journalist and a writer, and then he just like, hell with journalism and writing, I'm an activist. And so now he's an activist, and after starting 350.org, he kind of pulled back from that, and now he started a brand new nonprofit called Third Act. And all the members are over 65 or over 60. And they're like, what do I do now that I'm not got a job and I'm not in the game? Go look up Third Act and help start a chapter in Minnesota and invite Bill McKibben out here, and we'll do an event here with Bill McKibben at Third Act.
Yeah, great. So in your talk, you mentioned quite a bit about money in politics. And I wanted to ask here, what are some effective strategies that you found to engage citizens who are seeking to overcome some of the disinformation or some of the real challenges of just keeping morale going against such large moneyed interests?
People, you don't actually have to have everybody agree with you to get stuff done. I used to keep a folder on climate deniers and climate op-eds that were foolish, and once I made a complete menace of myself at the Star Tribune editorial board when they ran an op-ed from Jason Lewis that had 12 provably false statements in it. And I said, you could just print lies on the editorial page? But I finally realized that, and maybe looking back at the civil rights movement, do you think Martin Luther King sat around and worried about, well, what do we do about the last racists, like the hardcore racists? What do we do about them? He didn't talk about that or worry about that. He's like, we have goodwill, we have a working majority, people of goodwill see this is wrong, and he pressed Lyndon Johnson, and maybe he only had 40% of the people who were enthusiastic about what he was doing, and another 20% was like, maybe I'll go along. Well, the climate movement is at least that strong. So why do we spend all the time on like the 10 or 12% of people who were rabidly arguing that climate is made up and baloney? Well, the reason we do is because they took over a political party. But there are just not that many people like that. So we have a working majority of people who goodwill, who pay attention to what's going on, and you can follow the data. Yale Climate Communications is very, very conscientiously tracking how the data changes over the time. And some years it's better, some years it's worse, but I'm actually see the data after a year with no winter. I mean, did it snow here this winter? Oh yeah, 3 days when the ski race was here, it snowed those 3 days. That's a direct gift from God, George, I'll tell you that. So I mean, opinions change over time, but you don't have to have everybody with you.
Yeah, thanks. You mentioned a little bit in your talk, sort of hinted at these ideas of, you focused your career mostly in Minnesota with an eye on the federal policy, an eye on the international policy. But for folks who are working at the local level, who are really trying to understand what's their role in this bigger picture, this global issue, how would you encourage them to think about the importance of local action in this broader global-wide problem?
Well, we did mostly focus on state and collaborations between states and regional stuff, and multi-state stuff like transmission lines is multi-state, and then we focused on storytelling and journalism. But local action would be kind of the next big thing. It's a lot easier to organize a majority on a city council than it is maybe to organize a majority or on a county board. I always say that the single most important thing you can do on climate is to have the people who represent you in office know your name, know your face, recognize you're in the grocery store, know you're a thoughtful, reasonable person, and that this is one of your top issues. If you just like send a letter to the city council member or leave a voicemail or send an email, they're like, okay, that's one on that side. But if they're like, oh, that's Gabe Chan, I think he's smart. Yeah, he cares about this. It's like there's like a personal thing. It just matters. So if I ask you to do one thing, it would be find out who your city council member is, maybe your mayor, maybe your state representative and your state senator, and make a list of their names and we get their pictures and print them out on your printer, and say, I'm going to meet that guy. I'm going to meet that woman. And especially if they're in a different political party than you are. Even more important. Because even though maybe you didn't vote for them, they still represent you. So the way you do it is, you're extremely polite. You never, ever have any hint or tone of threat in your voice ever. It's always, this is what mattered for me, and you represent me. I think that's the single most powerful thing people can do, is communicate with the people who represent them that this is an issue they care about.
So I wanted to pick up on this idea of how to communicate about climate change. And one of the things you highlighted in your talk, I think, is an idea I've seen, I think our mutual friend Leah Stokes really highlight, this idea of policy feedbacks, that the Inflation Reduction Act is going to create wins that are going to make it impossible to repeal, as I think you said.
I do believe it.
So how do we communicate that story? What are the things we should be doing now, leading up into this next election and beyond, to make sure we are telling that story?
Well, again, I think that the prosperity story, the opportunity story, the lifting everybody up, the inclusion story, that this is a new industrial revolution. Jigar Shah calls it the largest wealth creation opportunity in human history. So focusing, maybe we don't all come together on the climate science, but maybe we can come together on, my kid deserves a good job. Like, maybe whatever political party I'm in, I'm like, I would like if my kid had a good job and a good opportunity. So maybe those are the things we focus on, is what are the benefits of all this policy, that are real tangible benefits in the community or real tangible benefits in our lives, and tell more stories about that. So, I both look forward to and I dread this election cycle, of course, but I think storytelling that is positive is, a significant importance.
Yeah, thanks. What about how do we reach across the aisle here? And not just the political aisle, but how do we reach across the urban-rural divide? How do we reach across different socioeconomic classes to tell this story?
That big divide of they don't respect us out here, or they don't think like us out here, or our family's been out here on this land, and those folks in Powderhorn Park, that divide is real. I tried to fight it. I tried to find ways to build the bridges. I just compliment you publicly that you took a sabbatical from your job teaching to become scholar in residence at the Rural Electric Co-op and help all the 27 co-ops in rural Minnesota think about how could we have a better electric power system for our community and our neighbors. I think you're a hero of mine. I think it's awesome that you did that. I hope you're going to write a good book about this.
This is your interview.
I hope you're going to write a good book about this. But, that's a good example. Gabe Chan, people would think, well, this Harvard-educated guy, what does he care about us? Well, he cares about you because he's giving his life to study your problems and figure out how your neighbors can have a better electric power system. He put every day of his life into it for 1 year. Basically, that's what he did with sabbatical. So we could all do that. We could all think we're all in this together. Because it's like two people in a canoe. Half the canoe can't sink. Even if you don't like each other, you're in this canoe, you have to make it work. Like, half the canoe can't sink. And the rural economy needs the urban economy. The urban economy needs the rural economy. Urban people need rural people. Rural people need urban people. The Republicans need the Democrats need the Republicans. We actually are in this together, and we have to make it work.
Thanks. I appreciate those comments. That was very kind of you. I'm thinking about, we talked about utilities. You talked about utilities in your talk as doing this big 180 in your telling of their climate solutions. What other industries do you think are coming next? Which are the other ones to be watching where we might see some really big changes in public commitments?
Well, obviously, cars. Automotive engineering. I'm not fond of the guy, but the guy who started the Tesla Corporation has done more to solve global warming than a human ever walked the earth. He basically built a company, and every automobile company in the world is trying to figure out how to catch up. And every one of them knows that at some point there won't be any cars left that are internal combustion engines that are for sale in the world. So I see that problem as sort of like 75% of the way solved, that cars can run on sunshine. Like, I didn't know that 20 years ago. Who knew that cars could run on sunshine? That's pretty awesome. Okay, check, cars can run on sunshine. Well, remember I said it's cheaper to save the planet than to destroy it? Cars can run on sunshine for the equivalent of 40 cents a gallon, and the car will go 100 miles. Cars can run on sunshine for 40 cents a gallon, and the car will go 100 miles. Cheaper to save the planet than to destroy it. That's why, like, I call that unstoppable. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. You can't unlearn that cars can run on sunshine, and 40 cents of sunshine can make a car go 100 miles. Now that you know that, you're never going to forget it. Well, you want that car when it's practical. Maybe you can't afford the car now. Maybe it's not practical now. But I think that's an example. Again, and the price is going down, 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 down. There was an op-ed in the New York Times, is the American automotive industry really, really ready for the tsunami of cars from China? What if the Chinese next year announce that there's a $15,000 four-seater car that goes 300 miles? Is Detroit ready for that? I don't know. You think that's impossible? I don't think it's impossible. These cars are incredibly simple. There's very few parts. The main part is the one that cost all the money, and that price is going down. Remember what I said happened to solar energy prices? Went down 99.9% over the last 40 years. That's what's happening in the lithium ion. It's going down 20% every year. Down, and then down, and then down, and then down again, and then down some more. So eventually they win, right? Lithium ion wins. So I would say that the technologies to watch are wind power, an old favorite. John Dunlop is the original gangster. He's right there. Wind power, solar power, lithium ion batteries, therefore electric cars, heat pumps are magic. Heat pumps are the greatest thing. They're magic. And transmission lines, which don't have any of the economies of mass production. So the transmission lines are that hard problem, because all the other cool solutions, they all have the economies of mass production, price falling and falling and falling and falling and falling, and transmission lines don't have that. Those are the technologies. And one thing I'll say, that if you're really like a nerd and you're like into this, go spend time reading the Federal Loan Programs Office report on virtual power plants. And I'll just give you one sentence on virtual power plants. When your thermostat and your solar panels and your house battery and your car charger and your water heater are all talking in real time to your power company, is the wind blowing? Is the sun shining? Is now a good time to heat the water? A virtual power plant is a technology that can make all the infrastructure we have be used much, much more efficiently than it's used now. We're using it very inefficiently. And when all that stuff has a chip in it, those 5 things, and can talk to the power company, their life is better, your life is better, they save money, you save money, and everything's carbon free. Again, that first sentence of that book that was published yesterday is now cheaper to save the planet than to destroy it. That's pretty amazing.
Well, I also love virtual power plants, so I'm glad you snuck that in there.
I'm glad you asked me what technologies to watch. I'm like, what technologies to watch? Oh, virtual power plants.
Yeah. All right.
It's one of the hottest topics at the Department of Energy is virtual power plants.
We're going to lose everyone if we keep going. I'm just kidding.
I know. I just snuck it in because it's only a small fraction care.
So this was the most asked question from our audience, and I think it gets asked at every climate talk, which is,
I think I know what you're going to say.
We're seeing the climate impacts. We had a winter without snow. It's in our face now. how do we keep going? How do we keep our hope and continue to be a happy warrior, a stubborn optimist, as you call it?
I don't actually have a good answer. I know that some people on Sunday night, they're like, oh my God, I gotta go to work tomorrow. I was like, I gotta go to work tomorrow. Like, I liked it. I always liked it. I always liked going to work, and I always liked the work. Did I get discouraged? Well, yeah, I told you all the discouragement, 30 years. I mean, imagine having Al Gore and Bill Clinton never talk about global warming until Grand Forks burned down. Like, imagine how sad that is. Imagine having this charismatic young kid from Chicago get to be president and have no game left after he did the Health Care Act. There was no climate discussion. Imagine how discouraging that was. So I was plenty depressed many times, but I just liked the work. And maybe it's just my personality, and so maybe there's nothing to learn from it. Maybe I am just a happy warrior, but I try to be fun and collegial and warm and create situations where people like being there and working on it. And I'm not invoking the name of my former employer, but I think most people like working there because it's fun. Is it fun? I think there's 2 employees here. It's still fun. It's fun. It's fun. Okay.
Well,
I don't have a good answer. I mean, do people get depressed? Do people get depressed about the climate and like they're in a dark place? I know that, but maybe it's just that people tend to be in a dark place, and some people don't struggle with that. But I know it's grim, and I just can't really go to a dark place, or I can't do the work. If I'm in a dark place, how do I do the work? So I just kind of chose to pick it up and keep going. I know that's a problem. There's a therapist now actually that work on that all day, every day. Like, there's climate therapists that specialize in that. People who have climate anxiety and climate depression, they have like a bunch of therapists. That's all they do. It's interesting. I sympathize. I don't have that problem, but I sympathize. I think it's really effing serious, and it's really bad. There's no doubt.
But we pick it up and keep going.
Yeah, but we keep going. Yeah. How do you do it?
Well,
you know the science. You're an atmospheric scientist before you're a policy nerd.
Yeah.
Wasn't that your undergraduate? Is that
Yeah.
atmospheric science?
Yeah.
You know the science better than anybody in the room. How do you do it? You've known it for like 25 years. You've known this is really dark.
Yeah. Well, I think similar to you, it's about building community. It's about building other people who see it similarly, and having that as your base, and that's where you find strength, and then work and branch out from there to find
That's good.
collaborators and people who think differently, but you have that kind of core community.
People who care about each other and they're in it together. Yeah, that's the good answer. People care about each other, they're in it together. That's a good answer.
All right, well, with that, thank you, Michael, for joining us here at the Swain Climate Lecture Series, Advancing Climate Solutions Now. To learn more, please visit our website, on the Humphrey School website, under the Center for Science, Technology, and Environmental Policy. And please join me in thanking Michael.